Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. Joining me today is AJ Kaufman. We have lots of great conversations with AJ here on the Ed Morrissey Show, and he joins us today. And a couple days after the elections, we're recording this on a Friday, as we're tooling into the weekend. We're seeing, I think, patterns develop here. Maybe several more days before we get anything firm. But AJ, I mean, I think that it's going to come down to Georgia in the Senate, and at least that's probably as good as it's going to get for the GOP in this cycle. And they're probably going to wind up with a very thin majority in the House. I think that's how I'm seeing this shape up. How are you seeing this shape up?
Well, I hope it comes down to Georgia, Ed. I mean, we still have to hope that Laxalt hangs on in Nevada, and that's looking a little dicier as we do this podcast. And assuming Laxalt holds on, then yeah, it'll come down to 3.5 weeks of intense discussion and campaigning in Georgia, like we saw 2 years ago. And we know that didn't turn out as well as we'd hope, but there may be a difference this time with less time, only one candidate, maybe a former president that won't get too involved for that runoff. Raphael Warnock, my gosh. I mean, if this guy winds up winning 2 runoffs in 2 years, I mean, it's hard to fathom, but it may happen.
Well, it's going to be close, right?
Yeah,
it's
very close.
And so I don't expect a blowout in either direction. It's going to be close. I think the question here is, what happened? As we're talking, you've got leadership fights that are apparently going to materialize in both the Senate and the House Republican caucuses, right? Marco Rubio came out this afternoon and said we should not have a leadership vote until we've had a leadership debate, which is a pretty good sign that he's not on board with just simply a quick ratification of the current leadership slate in the Senate. There are people who are asking for something similar in the House, but I think that Kevin McCarthy actually might be in a little bit stronger position vis-a-vis his caucus than Mitch McConnell might be at this point in time. His caucus, it's an interesting leadership in the House. I mean, McCarthy, I've always felt was a little bit weak. I think he's too much of a politician, and he tries to, balance the Freedom Caucus and the MAGA wing with the rest of the House. I like Steve Scalise. Elise Stefanik is a very strange person. She was a moderate upstate New York congresswoman who has now become the queen of MAGA. I mean, she is one of the few that's defending Trump the last couple of days. So it's a strange group. Jim Banks, same boat. But as far as the election goes, like in terms of what happened, I mean, we're not going to go back and rehash our predictions, but I will say that I thought it would probably be 50-50 at the end. I was hoping I'd be wrong, but you did. Yeah, I remember that conversation.
It's possible I could be correct. I'm still hoping it's 51. I think you said 52. So if split the difference, we'll see. The House is where you and I differed, and I think we're only going to pick up maybe 10 at the most. I believe I said 15 and you said 27, 28. So I was not as optimistic. Obviously, what happened in the House was, I think, because in the Senate, it's a personality, it's an individual race, I think a lot more. In the House, abortion ranked a lot higher in people's minds in places like Pennsylvania and maybe New Hampshire and Arizona and elsewhere than we imagined. And I think it came in second at like 27% in a lot of exit polls. And after the economy, of course, but crime did not materialize as big an issue as Republicans had hoped, and frankly, as it should have. It ranked below the economy and below abortion, and maybe another.
Yeah, I wrote about this yesterday too.
Right.
I mean, when I saw those exit polls on election day, and this is before the polls were all closed, right? These were early exits, and they held up in the overall exits, which was that it was economy 32%, abortion 27%, crime 11%. And I looked at that and I said, this is not going to be as good a night as we were in.
And that's nationally. That's not just among Democrats, right?
No, that was overall. Yeah.
Right.
Among Democrats, abortion was 42%. And it was 11% among Republicans, which, is probably at least a significant part of that is pro-lifers.
I would assume.
but I mean, it was clearly, and Republicans never really had a good answer for it. They never messaged on it. They messaged heavily on crime. And I think that was really the thing that worried me the most, was after they spent more money on ads on crime in the final few weeks than they did on the economy. and it was a bad bet because, as it
It was a
turned
bad
out,
bet. It was that's the thing. It seemed like an okay bet, and the cable news channels pushed it, and the blogs pushed it, and it was a bad bet. I don't know. I'm not saying I disagreed. I thought people, because crime
I thought it was
affects
a good bet
everyone.
too.
It affects suburban too, not just urban, and even affects rural. But it's disappointing. I will say that I think I said to you on Friday, last Friday, when we talked, or last Monday, the 31st of October, when we spoke, that I
Right.
thought the reason that the Democrats would do better in the Senate than you thought, and maybe other conservatives that you might find on TV thought, was because I figured that they would rise above Biden's low approval ratings. And I don't know if I name names, but I always figured it would be Mark Kelly, who was always more popular than Biden, Maggie Hassan, maybe Cortez Masto in Georgia, and John Fetterman, who, we can talk and make fun of John Fetterman all we want. And he's not only has the health issues and is far radical, he is popular. I'm sorry, folks. I don't like him. He is popular. He outperformed Biden incredibly out in Western Pennsylvania among the white working class. And he outperformed Trump. A lot of those people probably voted for Trump once or twice, and they went for Fetterman. You can see the numbers in these heavily white working class counties of Western Pennsylvania, where people thought that, would be voting Republican. They didn't. And part of that is Dr. Oz, who, I'm sorry, was a terrible candidate. I've said it from day one. We would have won with someone else. He had no connection to the working class. He didn't even try. And people thought he was from New Jersey, and that actually worked. And I hope we never see him again, frankly.
Well,
As a
okay.
candidate.
I actually think that Oz got better as a candidate as the race went along. I thought
But
he
he
did
couldn't relate to people. He just couldn't.
No, I mean, I think that he was actually engaging people. I think he was doing the groundwork necessary.
Working class people.
No, I mean, in working class people, you should be reading some of what Selena Zito.
But Selena Zito was wrong. She admitted today in the Washington Examiner she was wrong. The bottom line, I know she lives out there.
I'm talking. No, I'm not talking about her prediction. She was wrong about her prediction. Okay. I'm talking about her reporting on what he was actually doing. He was out actually talking to voters, sitting down in the diners, going, not rallies, but actual retail politicking. And she said and I think he did as well as he could in the environment that he was in. But I'll tell you what I think the actual biggest problem in Pennsylvania was Doug Mastriano at the top.
Oh, right. I'm sorry. Yes, we can't ignore that. A Trump endorsed crazy candidate, conspiracy, maybe a little bigoted, awful candidate.
Awful candidate. And Josh Shapiro. And I don't want to take anything away from Josh Shapiro, because Josh Shapiro was going to win that race anyway. I mean, he's a very good candidate. He's a very good, smart guy. I was
surprised he only won it by 10 or 11 points, Shapiro. Actually, frankly, closer than I thought it might be.
Yeah, but look, I mean, I think that was really the big issue there. There was a joke going around. I thought it was pretty funny. Do I want to vote for the party that nominates brain damaged people, or do I want to vote for the party that loses to brain damaged people? I mean, that was sort of the joke that was going around after Fetterman won. Fetterman is not capable of doing that job. I have no idea how that's going to play out. Maybe he gets better. Maybe he doesn't. But that was both parties' failure, right? Dave McCormick if Dave McCormick won that primary, and he damn near did, I think Dave McCormick wins that election.
I think so too.
And so, yeah, I mean, candidate quality mattered, and it didn't matter just for the particular race that we're talking about. The Doug Mastriano thing was Arizona's another great candidate. You had Mark Brnovich, who probably would have won that Senate seat.
And the other gentleman, there were two others in that race that probably would have won. I think Masters was the only one in that race who would have lost, but he was promoted by the media, the populist Tucker Carlson media, the former president, and I guess others, and he won the primary fair and square. But that's, I think other candidates would have won. So you got to remember that.
I'm not saying that it wasn't fair and square. Voters selected these people. Right. I mean, they certainly took the recommendations of their favorite politicians, and kept that in mind. But voters selected these people. These are the people who legit won the primaries. I have no complaints about that whatsoever. But, we saw something very similar in 2010, and maybe even to a good extent in 2012 too.
I know we were going with this,
party, right? I mean, this is the Sharon Angle problem. This is the Christine O'Donnell problem. This is the Todd Aiken and Richard Murdoch problem. And I don't even think that Murdoch was that bad of a candidate.
He wasn't. I was going to defend Murdoch because I lived in Indiana then. He's a very sharp, pro-Israel, good conservative. He made one comment that wasn't handled well, and that kind of doomed it.
And I think he actually kind of got shafted on that, because his comment actually wasn't bad, but it was in the same context as Todd Aiken's ridiculous comments about, you can't get pregnant after a rape, or during a rape, which is insane.
Scientifically not true.
It was absurd. He was, but at any rate, I think Murdoch kind of got the short end of the stick.
Got tied in with that. Yeah.
Yeah, he was actually a better candidate than that. But at any rate, I mean, when you have these sort of movements, which are populist. Now, Tea Party wasn't quite as populist as the MAGA. Different. It was more on hardcore, fiscal conservatism. The Tea Party was than
populism is not fiscally conservative.
No, it's not. But it's the same sort of dynamics, right? So
yeah, sure.
If those movements mature, then they get better at that type of thing, right? They get a little bit more adept at selecting candidates. And that's what happened with the Tea Party. And by 2014, a lot of the people who were running there were the product of candidate recruitment that combined Tea Party activists along with the party establishment. They actually were able to ally together to draft good candidates, and we're still benefiting from that.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is, though, that wasn't what happened here. Clearly, there was this complete conflict in party leadership, and this is something Politico's writing about today. And it's the reason why Rubio is saying we should not have a vote until we hash this out. There was a huge disconnect between Mitch McConnell and Rick Scott at the NRSC, between the Senate Leadership Fund and the NRSC. They didn't coordinate. They were conflicted almost, for almost the entire cycle, and in part over candidate recruitment, which Rick Scott didn't want to get involved in. It's a mess, and I'm not even sure that it matters who's to blame for it. The problem is,
but it's
everybody has
strange
to be held accountable for it.
Rick Scott is a first-term senator, a great governor, by the way, not a great senator in my opinion. I'm not sure. I know how these NRSC and NRCC chairs work. He's a strange choice, in my opinion, and he did promote candidates. The 4 or 5 we've mentioned, McConnell got on board with Walker because everyone was on board with Walker. I think I heard someone say this week that Herschel Walker clinched the Republican nomination in 1980 when he won the Heisman Trophy, because that's what he wrote to the nomination. There were other good candidates in Georgia, but no one really was against him in leadership. But when it comes to Pennsylvania and Arizona and maybe Nevada and New Hampshire and possibly even North Carolina, Wisconsin, and Ohio, which we didn't even talk about, these were Rick Scott and Donald Trump's candidates, who some of them conspiracy theorists, some of them not, some of them extreme right, some of them more populist. Look, we don't need to get too into it, but J.D. Vance, I'm glad he won as a Republican, but the governor, DeWine, won by 25 points, and J.D. Vance won by 5. McConnell had to sink a lot of money into Ohio.
I thought it was 7. I thought
it may have been 7 by the end. It was single digits.
Yeah, it was single digits, and he underperformed Mike DeWine.
That's a huge difference, 25 versus 7, and that's we know why Vance not as popular for various reasons. Also, something of an election denier that we sort of backtracked. People don't like election deniers. I think that's the problem. We realize that now. There's very few people still talking about that. But Vance sucked up a lot of money, and it helped him win. But it didn't. That money didn't go to Washington, Colorado, New Hampshire, even Arizona. So that hurt. And I don't know, Rick Scott. He had a Social Security plan, which is a different discussion. We fizzled out. And we didn't get the huge gains we wanted to because of candidate quality, and because I don't think the Democrats had great candidates, but they also had some incumbents. The power of the incumbency is important.
Yeah, and Republicans had 5 retirements in a cycle where they were.
We discussed this. This is not a great map. This is not a great map.
It wasn't a great map.
But look at 2024.
But here's the thing.
Great map.
Great map in 2024, but this is the reason why you have this leadership discussion right now.
No, Rubio's correct.
You don't want to screw up a great map in 2024. And I think at the very least, everybody in that Senate Republican caucus had better make sure that whoever they have at the top of these organizations are going to work with each other well. I mean, just simply flat out, that's a first requirement. If you're not going to work together well, then we're going to shuffle this around until we find 2 leaders who will, because It wasn't a great map. It wasn't even a good map. This was a tough map for the
Agreed. I
Senate.
told people that.
However, they had
Yep.
plenty of opportunities to win. I mean, Don Bolduc in New Hampshire was a giveaway to Maggie Hassan. That was the Aiken strategy. We talked about that before.
Yep,
I was hoping that Bolduc would pull it out. Clearly didn't even come close. But Chuck Morse probably would have beaten Maggie Hassan.
Yes, he would have.
Yep.
I mean, I'm pretty sure New Hampshire is a blue state, but it's there's so few people in New Hampshire that you could 30,000 votes.
Yeah, but Chris Sununu ran away with the gubernatorial election.
That's correct. He's a moderate Republican and very well liked. Correct.
And Chuck Morse is a moderate Republican and very well liked as well in New Hampshire.
You're right. Well, there you go. What can I tell you? You're making my point for me.
I know. I know. I'm agreeing with you.
Hey, Ed, I have a couple stats though that I thought were interesting that I read this morning. So the independent vote is what helped the Democrats a lot in this race. They won independents. I forget the actual number, but they won independents by a decent margin. Even though Republican turnout was strong, the electorate was actually more Republican than Democrat than 2022 versus 2020.
Which we assumed. Yep.
Democrats won independent voters. And someone I heard say it's maybe the first time he can remember that a party that controlled the presidency won independents in that midterm. So they got a lot of independents. They may have even had some self-identified Republicans. But the numbers in the presidential election of 2016, Trump and Hillary split independents, pretty much even. In 2018, they went 15 points for the Democrats, independents, in the midterms. In 2020, Biden won them by 9, the independents. And this year, the Democrats won them by 12. And that's, that goes back to candidate quality, goes back to maybe some issues with policy issues, former president, whatever.
I think it goes back to Democrats being a lot more successful at messaging on abortion.
Yeah.
And Republicans missing the bet on crime. I think that they thought they were going to get the independents with the crime issue.
Yeah, and I can't blame them for that. That's the one strategy. I'm not sure why. We know people are concerned about community safety, but they didn't vote on it, or they voted on abortion.
I think it was a completely rational bet, and I can't fault anybody for betting on it, except to this extent, is that they probably should have asked more voters. They probably should have done a lot more work on the ground, finding out exactly which voters were concerned about this and where, and maybe not using the national. Yeah, I've written about this in Going Red. That's right over there.
Going Red on my bookshelf too. There it is.
Yeah, national messaging is not usually very successful, especially national issue messaging, because it's different in every single community. So you have to know how to contextualize these things. And
the bigger issue in New York, where Republicans did well, by the way.
It may have been a pretty decent issue in Wisconsin, where Ron Johnson won his election. It didn't win it by as much as we thought he was going to win it, but they did rely heavily on the crime issue there too. But the abortion issue, I'm going to come back to this because I know I've seen people, David Harsanyi, whose opinion I respect mightily, is insisting that it didn't have anything to do with this. But even pro-life groups are saying Republicans really screwed this up by not being assertive on this. They allowed Democrats to paint Republicans as extremists, because what happened after Dobbs, they tried to pass, or at least they were floating the ideas of complete abortion bans, both at the federal and state level.
Initially,
right? And then when it became clear that was a really stupid idea, it was a really bad idea. So just give it a few months to let the facts play out a little bit, and then find out where the middle is on this thing.
Yeah. They did well toward the end. It's funny when you watch the debates. Now, I don't care what they say about abortion in New York and California, places where it's not going to have any effect. And that's why it was pathetic that Kathy Hochul kept bringing it up, because Lee Zeldin said it's not going to have an effect on people in New York. But in Ohio and Arizona and Georgia and such, and even Pennsylvania, well, Oz had a pretty weak answer because he's not really that pro-life, frankly. But Masters and Walker and even Bolduc and others and Vance had pretty good answers. They were pretty neutral on abortion. They were talking about European models and about 15 weeks and 12 weeks. I thought that was okay, but I think the writing was already on the wall, if that's the cliche. And voters already said, oh my God, J.D. Vance and Blake Masters and Don Bolduc are going to force me to give birth, let's just say. And that affected people in the suburbs more than crime.
Yeah, I mean, Susan B. Anthony list, which is
Yes.
one of the oldest pro-life groups in America. They've been through a few election cycles, made a very good point, which was that after that initial screw up, Republicans just kept saying, well, we're just going to leave it up to the states. We're going to leave it up to the states. So they didn't even want to talk about the issue when they should have been very vocally pointing out how radical the Democrats were on this issue.
Some did, but you're right, not enough. Some did.
Not enough, not enough.
Rubio did, and he won by 20 points. So there's an example. That might have been the reason. And the governors by the way, governors are different than senators. I mean, that's the thing. Senators may have a vote someday on it, but governors are the ones in charge of the state. So, if you don't have an answer on that as a gubernatorial candidate, by the way, Mike DeWine is a very pro-life guy, and he won by 25 in a state that's reddish, but not exactly, ruby red. So
yeah, but I don't think DeWine was talking about bans, right? And DeSantis, by the way, Ron DeSantis,
pretty strict law in Ohio. Pretty strict law.
Was it 8 weeks, 10 weeks?
It's around there. Yeah, it's not 12. I mean, it's
a heartbeat bill.
Yeah, and but DeWine comes off as a nice professorial bureaucrat, where JD Vance doesn't.
Right,
so
right.
It's true.
So, but I mean,
by the way,
Ron DeSantis backed the 15-week bill, which was basically what Roe was before Casey. Is what you've got in Florida, and Ron DeSantis backed that, not because he likes abortions, but because he understood that that's where Florida voters were at, and it's sustainable with that. And if Florida voters change, Ron DeSantis probably flex around that anyway. But this was to me, this was Ron DeSantis is clearly a pretty brilliant guy. I don't know anybody else who's taken a borderline purple/blue state and flipped it into a completely red flood zone in 4 years, right?
Yeah, that's what I wrote. That was the first part of my article that I wrote on Wednesday at LibBlog, was just basically saying he's got to, I think he should wait until the Florida legislative session's conclusion in early May. But to go in 4 years, like you said, from sort of a fringy Congressman Trump devotee who only won by like 30,000 votes to arguably America's most successful governor, re-election by 20 points and 1.5 million votes, even with all the people that have moved to Florida, by the way. There are a couple 100,000 that have come down. There's 400,000 more Republicans in the state than there were 4 years ago. Even with all that, it's still pretty impressive.
He won Miami-Dade.
So did Rubio. They both did.
Yeah, and both of them won Palm Beach. Excuse me, Palm Beach.
Right. And not Broward. Broward's the more liberal one, but yeah, that's
yeah. I mean, if he won Broward, I would call this an extinction level event.
Right. Florida Democrats are pretty much dead anyway. In fact, and to be honest, Val Demings was not a terrible candidate. I mean,
she wasn't.
No. Crist, on the other hand, I think he's lost 6 elections now in the last 22 years, something.
Crist, I got to tell you, I know this may be a little off track here, but I just have to say this. I think Charlie Crist is a performance artist whose conceptual performance is, how badly can I lose an election? I mean, this is a guy who started off the day after the primary by declaring that anybody who liked Ron DeSantis shouldn't vote for him because he doesn't want their vote because they're haters. When Ron DeSantis was, I think, toting around a 56% job approval rating in the state that Crist wanted to win. And then he picks Hernandez Matz. I think it's Carla Hernandez Matz as a running mate, who's a teachers union official who was pressing so hard for school closures that she sent hearses to I think it was a Ron DeSantis.
A performative politician at the worst, yeah.
They're both performative politicians. And this is, again, where candidate quality matters. Now, who was is it Nikki Fried was the other?
Yes, I was going to say his primary opponent was worse, actually. So
they didn't have any good candidates.
He was the moderate. He was the better candidate in the primary, in theory.
They should have run Val Demings for governor, because she wouldn't have won either.
No,
but she might have helped pull more Democrats up along with her. And this is what Lee Zeldin did in New York. Mm-hmm. Lee Zeldin didn't win.
I'm glad you're getting to that, because that's a very good point.
But he came within 6 points of a sitting Democratic governor. You can call her incumbent. She's sitting.
Sometimes she's standing.
She was the one who ended up with the job after Andrew Cuomo got chased out of it. Finally, and so she's running for her first term, but she's still an incumbent, and her first full term. And he came within 6 points of her, ran a brilliant campaign, did everything right. He was just running in New York, and that just isn't going to happen. But because he ran such a good campaign, and because his messages really resonated, you've got what, 4 new Republican congressmen from or congresspeople from New York, and maybe 5. And Sean Patrick Maloney got the boot.
Yeah, he did. It helped pull them along in what some might call upstate New York. It's not very far upstate, but like Rockland County, Westchester area, and then also Long Island, which, you know, I've always thought historically, at least the Nassau County, which is the first county, is fairly liberal because it's a wealthy county. Nassau County is completely red now in terms of Congress. All Republicans won there in Long Island, and that's because of Lee Zeldin, who's from there. So he did a great thing, and he also, there's a great article on, I forget the website, Persuasion maybe, or one of these or maybe it was Barry Weiss's Common Sense, about the Asian vote, which we never hear about the Asian vote. Never. Well, the Asian vote in Queens in some areas went Republican. They liked Lee Zeldin, and that never happens. And that obviously helped turn some districts, or at least make some elections closer. And that's a key point to remember. So Zeldin is the best person who lost, certainly, of the night.
Right.
And has a good, bright future. The guy's younger than I am, I believe. So, you know.
He's a pretty young guy. Unfortunately, he's not in office anymore because, of course,
but he can run. Well, problem is he's in New York. Yeah, he'll be a cabinet member in the next Republican presidential administration.
I think so too. I think he'll be a cabinet member. So, you know, we haven't talked about this yet because frankly, on Friday I kind of exhausted the topic with Dwayne Patterson. But I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about this because I know that you're kind of champing at the bit about this, talking about the next Republican administration. You know, obviously Ron DeSantis, there's no way that Ron DeSantis does not run for the Republican nomination this cycle. I'm also going to be talking with Adam Baldwin on the Amiable Skeptics. I already have recorded that and we discussed this. But I mean, Ron DeSantis, he's got $100 million or close to it in the bank. He's immensely relevant at the moment in a way that he won't be 4 years from now. He's young, but this is his moment. His moment has arrived. So he's obviously going to jump into this race. Trump clearly wants to as well. And Trump knows this, right? There's also talk about Glenn Youngkin jumping into this race. And apparently Trump knows that too.
Apparently, as of this morning, Trump knows that too.
Yeah. So look, we'll give it a few minutes here, but what is Trump's meltdown on Truth Social? 2 meltdowns, last night and this morning. What does that tell you about where he's at? And what do you think that says about where the party's at the moment in terms of future leadership?
Well, I think Trump's outbursts are clearly a sign of weakness. I think they're being perceived as signs of weakness by many of his most ardent supporters. And if these people sense weakness, or they sense that he's a losing candidate because his whole motif is I win and I'm tough and you know, when they see him being so thin-skinned, that element of Trumpism that they enjoy begins to disappear. And I think what's also important is that the Trump wing, they didn't like Jeb Bush, they didn't like Marco Rubio, they didn't like Ted Cruz, they didn't like John Kasich, whomever. They like Ron DeSantis. I think every Trump supporter I know likes Ron DeSantis. So if he's going to go after Ron DeSantis, that's not going to fly with his most vociferous supporters. So I did some, anecdotal, emailing and texting some of my Trump supporting people that are really big Trump supporters, not just voted for him twice, but, went to rallies and I'd say have the t-shirts and all that. And right. I think, 20 out of 22 or something like that. These are all two genders, all ages, all geographical, socioeconomic people on the right, not left wingers. And they 20 out of 22 said that they're either done with him or they're really upset with him. And all of them like DeSantis, so it's really, and he's getting the media to turn on him. And I don't mean like the media, the mainstream media. I mean like Fox. I mean like the New York Post. I mean Wall Street Journal.
All of which are
Candace Owens.
Oh, I didn't know about Candace Owens.
She said he's got to calm down and not declare for a while, kind of like Kayleigh McEnany said. If they're jumping off the Trump train, it may finally be, what's my best analogy? It may be pulling the station as they jump off. Does that make sense?
Close. Close, but I mean, I think it's interesting too because Doyle McManus, who's a Los Angeles Times columnist, is the first one who I saw point this out, which was that across the entire Murdoch empire, as soon as the Ron DeSantis attack went out, man, there was. You take a look at the Wall Street Journal's opinion page that morning, and it's all we got to dump Trump, right? Fox News.
They've never been huge Trump supporters, to be fair, but I think that's the best editorial page in the country at the same time.
Well, yeah, but I mean, Murdoch also employs guys like Tucker Carlson, right?
Right. Well, you're not going to get, you're going to, glancing at Fox, even Tucker doesn't really talk about Trump. He's more into like some conspiracies and Blake Masters and all that. But even Jesse Waters, big fan, is kind of like, he's a little bit confused. Hannity's kind of confused. Laura Ingraham's, she's never going to really abandon him. Nor is Kellyanne Conway. But yeah, they know deep inside. No, they just want jobs in the Republican administration.
I want to see how many of them actually stick with him after the sounds Chinese comment about Glenn Youngkin. Because that to me is that's a Rubicon right there, right? I mean,
They stuck with him after he said things about Elaine Chao that were similar, I think. Well, I mean, your career is in jeopardy when you criticize. It's tough.
Well, he talked about Elaine Chao. Elaine Chao actually has Chinese ancestry. She's not Chinese though. She's
You're saying Glenn Youngkin's not Chinese?
Well, what made that even worse? First off, because it was just absurd. It's that
was Friday morning.
But there's actually a young Kim, a Republican,
great congresswoman from California, one big,
right, from Orange County.
Maybe he meant young Kim.
Well, somehow I think that's let me
they don't look alike.
Put it this way. It's not a good look for anybody. Nobody's defending this, right?
He's picking the two most popular governors in America. Well, and Brian Kemp being the third, who he also doesn't like for other reasons 2 years ago. He's picking on the wrong people. These people are well liked by the entire Republican Party. It's not a smart move. He's sitting there in Mar-a-Lago stewing. I get it. But boy, oh boy, his fantasies about the 2020 election already hurt us once. And, the fact that he keeps losing, oh boy, he's basically the establishment loser now. And they usually get tossed aside, losers, historically.
All right. So I wanted to make sure that we got that in. Now, to wrap things up, though.
Yes,
to wrap things up, what do you think the biggest lesson is for Republicans in the midterm ripple?
Well, actually, I have a lesson for Democrats. Is that okay?
Yeah, feel free.
I'm always giving advice.
They're not listening.
They are. They're everywhere. Right there. One right there. My window's open and he's right outside. Hey, George. Biden said he's not going to change anything. Biden's very, very, very thin-skinned and very vain too. We forget that. We talk a lot about Trump. Biden's very similar. And he's not responsible.
Two peas in a pod. They're two peas in a pod.
They're very similar, despite what people think. They're very similar. Biden and the leadership there, congressional leaders, need to continue to ignore the left wing of their party. This is the part of the party that proclaims that inflation and cost of living issues and public safety are fake issues cooked up by the racists on the right? They should focus on the economy and crime and get back into the good graces of people that actually care about it and are stressed out by personal finances and the safety in their community. So there's that for the Democrats. And in terms of Republicans, look, for me, I like to focus on policy. So I would continue focusing on the policies that the Republicans are more popular upon, that being economy, inflation, the border, crime, foreign policy to some degree. The culture war battles, mostly I don't think are great for us. Sometimes they work. Certainly anyone still talking about 2020 as we move into 2023 is crazy. And we've got a woman who may be governor of Arizona, who may be Trump's vice presidential candidate, who probably wants to still talk about them. Ironically, her campaign took off and did well when she stopped talking about that and began talking about issues. So that's a lesson right there. I'd leave it at that.
All right. So here's my lesson. And it's the same lesson for both parties. Get new leadership. If your average leadership age is 75 or over, you need new leadership.
For both parties, you mean?
I'm talking about both parties. Both parties. Find newer, younger leaders. They don't have to be Gen Z, but by God, they probably shouldn't be boomers at this stage.
Well, I think in defense of the Republicans, and I like Mitch McConnell a lot, I think Mitch McConnell's the only Republican leader who's over 70, right?
I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure. I mean,
McCarthy's not.
John Cornyn. I like John Cornyn, but I think John Cornyn.
He might be over 70, but John Thune is not. John Thune's an excellent guy, I think.
Well, I mean,
no one in the House leadership's over 70.
And that's fine.
Okay.
But make sure that the leadership is effective too. And
yeah, look, I tell you right now,
make sure that it works make sure that it can work together.
Right. I'm concerned about the House leadership because I think we have essentially 4 leaders, and I really only like one of them, that being Steve Scalise. I wish he was going to be the speaker. McCarthy and Stefanik and Banks, who, I used to have a lot more respect for, they're kind of, certainly Banks and Stefanik are really a little too out there in the MAGA wing, in the populist, even the conspiratorial wing. So hopefully McCarthy and Scalise can work together well, but they're all under 70. So there's that.
All right.
Byron Donald is running. It wants to get involved in leadership, by the way. That would be a good idea.
Yeah. Again, both parties, the leadership has aged out. I mean, doesn't mean that they can't be in office, but by golly, you're going to need to get somebody who voters.
You're telling me Jim Clyburn is too old?
Jim Clyburn, I think, is the youngest of the 3, isn't he?
I'd like to, frankly, even though he's 97 years old, I'd like to put Chuck Grassley in leadership. He won. Chuck won.
Actually, I take that back. I think he's actually younger than the 3 House leaders.
No, he's 89. He's 89.
Chuck Schumer?
Chuck Grassley.
Oh, Grassley. Oh, I think
Iowa. No, Schumer's about 70. No, Chuck Grassley is 89 years old. He's in better shape than most people we know, and both mentally and physically, and he's going to serve till he's 95, and God bless him.
But I mean, he's a committee chair. I'm not talking about committee chairs.
I know. I'm just saying. I'm jokingly saying he should go to leadership because he's 90.
Yeah, I don't even think Chuck Grassley would want to do that. But yeah, you've got some younger people in the Senate. You've got some dynamic people in the Senate. Both parties. They should be relying on him. Same thing in the House. All right. AJ Kaufman, you can find him at lidblog.com an awful lot. Also at Arutz Sheva, which is israelnationalnews.com, I think.
That is correct. You got it.
And other places too. Where else can they find you?
Oh my gosh, they can find me in local newspapers across the Midwest and South. I mean, just look anywhere in Ohio, Minnesota, Tennessee, Virginia, find a local paper. You'll find something I've written. It's just, I spread myself out as best I can. So I won't give all the names, but yeah, you can find me in business magazines sometimes too, writing about farming and meat processing plants and nuclear energy. It's just, the knowledge is just.
There you go. Have brain will travel, reads the card of a man.
The travel part, yeah.
Yeah, well, that reference I think automatically disqualifies me for any leadership positions. That's from like the 1950s, man. All right, AJ Kaufman, thanks so much for being with us, and stay tuned for a last message from the Ed Morrissey Show coming up next. A new era at Hot Air has begun, and with the midterm elections just around the corner, our team is ready to fight for the conservative issues and bring you election analysis with new focus and purpose. This November, we face the choice of economic ruin with Joe Biden and his progressive Democrats, or a fresh start on the basis of American strength. But we need your help now more than ever to continue our conservative reporting and mission. By becoming a Hot Air VIP or VIP Gold member, you become an integral part of our team. Not only will you get exclusive access to reporting and commentary you can't get anywhere else, you will help us in our war against big tech and social media censorship. We cover the issues that truly matter, and with your help, the left can never silence us. You will also get access to my twice-weekly discussions with Adam Baldwin on The Amiable Skeptics, where we delve deeply into the philosophies and ideologies below the surface of today's current events. And you will support the vital work of Dwayne Patterson, who knows practically everyone in politics, Tampa's Tom Jackson, who gives Hot Air readers the inside scoop on Florida politics and more, and Jazz Shaw, and our newest team member, David Strong, who offer even more in-depth analysis on the latest political developments. And for our VIP Gold members, Bearing Arms Cam Edwards and I offer direct engagement with members through our live chats, the most fun hour we have in the week. We are humbled by the support our readers have already shown us, and we hope to have all of you join us to keep this mission on track. Over the last couple of months, I've been honored to lead Hot Air as our new managing editor and look forward to all that is to come. On behalf of our team, I thank all of you for your support. Help us expose and put a stop to Joe Biden and the Democrats' radical agenda. Join Hot Air VIP today and use the promo code SAVEAMERICA to receive a major discount on your VIP or VIP Gold membership. Thank you very much.